So this session that we will have, again, it's a post-lunch session, and we'll have top 4 speakers of the lot will be speaking in this session. The reason why we chose the best speaker post-lunch, because it's an important ask and task for them to keep everyone awake, but also keep everyone engaged. We could have had these people in the morning, but everyone was refreshed in the morning, so we thought we'll use Siddharth and the team post-lunch. So let me introduce this session. This session is about technology and data for low-emission zone. It will be moderated by Ashok Dev, who is the senior researcher at ICCT. So Ashok, if you could kindly come on the dais. We have Namita Gupta, who is the founder of AirVeda. Namita, if you could kindly come up on the dais, please. Our good old friend Siddharth Sinha, who is now at Google, and you might have met him when he was at NITI. So Siddharth, nice to have you on the dais. And then we have Mr. Abhijeet Sinha, who is from the National Highway, electrification of National Highway. And Subrata, who has joined us from Ather, the two-wheeler motorcycle company. So we'll start this session. It'll be about 1 hour, and I'll leave it to Ashok to moderate the session. But I will request my colleague Moorthy to make the background presentation, and then we can start the discussion.
Good afternoon, all. To start with, I'll be explaining what ICCT is working when it comes to low emission zone. We are working with 3 Indian cities, namely Pimpri Chinchwad, Pune, and Shambhaji Nagar, Chhatrapati Shambhaji Nagar, which was previously known as Aurangabad. All the 3 cities are in the state of Maharashtra. And I'll be going through the data sets that we had used. We have 2 major objectives in this entire low emission zone program. The first is to identify or demarcate the low emission zone within a city. Point number 2 is to develop a strategical roadmap to implement low emission zone by 2030 within these 3 cities. To start with, we will be looking into the basic data for any city. These are the 4 set of data that we'll be looking into to demarcate low emission zone within any particular city. The first and foremost is the air quality data. So when it comes to air quality data, there are city-run, city-operated or state-operated continuous ambient air quality monitoring station and manual ambient air quality monitoring stations, which are more authentic data sets. And we actually delve deeper into this data set, try to understand what are the historic trends, what are the hotspots available, etc. When it comes to these data, these are stationary data sets and these are point data sets. And this comes with several set of challenges. 2 major challenges are these stations are pretty new, as most of the cities have started implementing or installing these stations recently after the implementation of NCAP. So these data sets actually lack in historic trends as well as spatial mapping, as in the spatial coverage is quite poor. These stations are very expensive, so it's just 4 or 5 stations set up in one particular city doesn't cover the entire city. So as an alternate, we used a satellite plus model data sets. So when it comes to satellite data set, there are various agencies providing this data sets. A couple of them are SANS and Washington University data. SANS is the data set developed by IIT Delhi. This is PM 2.5 high resolution data set, which is at 1 into 1 square kilometer. However, the website is down and the data is not currently available for public. For that reason, we had used Washington University data. The data is available all the way from 2020 to 2021. At a global level at a very high resolution 1 into 1 square kilometer. So this can actually give you the hotspots within all the cities, within the city area. Second is once we have this data set, these are actually taken in terms of grid format. We divide the entire city into 2 into 2 square kilometer grids and we take the data within each of the 2 into 2 square kilometer grids. And then to understand the relationship between exposure and population, we take the population data set. For population, we all know that census is the most relied data set, but unfortunately the last census that took place was in the year 2011 and we don't have these projections. So So we definitely do have projections by Government of India, by Ministry of Family and Health Welfare, but the projections are in state level. We don't have that in a very fine gridded resolution or at a ward level. For that fact, we rely again on satellite data provided by NASA and European Commission. We used global human settlement layer data, which is high resolution satellite data. We actually superimposed with this gridded data, and then we again got the values within this individual grids. Then to make sure that now that we have this PM 2.5 data to commensurate for this transport emissions, we took road network. That is, the road network layers are available with the city authorities. If in case this is not updated, we used data from OpenStreetMaps, and this was superimposed, and we actually set up some criteria-based conditioning to filter this data set and then finalize the hotspots within the cities. And these hotspots were finally then converted into a area which is finally demarcated as a low emission zone. And within this low emission zone, we made sure that this has got optimum infrastructure such as bus stops, metro stations, NMTs, schools, colleges, EV charging stations. All these data sets were actually gathered from city authorities. Some data that are not available were taken from Google and some government websites. So the first one was on demarcating the low emission zone. Next comes is the very important aspect, which is vehicle emission inventory, to identify which are the most polluting vehicles and how to restrict these vehicles over the time and achieve low emission zone and significant impact on air quality. To start with, we did surveys, which is very common, which is also called as fuel station and parking lot surveys. We identified fuel stations and parking lots based on land use, land cover. And once these stations are identified, we have received authorizations and we have selected an optimum sample size and we have conducted surveys. The surveys was majorly to gather 5 to 6 set of information. One is on the registration number, type of vehicle that is operational, type of fuel these vehicles uses, vehicle kilometer traveled, fuel efficiency, fuel economy. So this is the ones that are highlighted in red are the 3 major important data or responses that we collect from commuters through fuel station and parking lots for all the vehicle categories. And from Vahan, which is again a very important database, we collect all other vehicle information such as vehicle category, engine displacement, year of registration, Bharat state standard, and engine strokes. So getting back to Vahan, so we have faced a couple of challenges when it comes to Vahan. That is, for pre-2017, the Bharat state standards for most of the vehicles are not available. This is a huge data gap which can actually affect the quality of the entire study. The same is the case with engine stroke. However, most of the vehicles are 4-stroke, but we do have auto rickshaws which are still 2 strokes, which are operational in some parts of the cities. So this is just a glimpse of primary data that we had collected for Pune. So these are responses which we can infer directly without any in-depth analysis. So we have age-wise fuel share, we have fuel share by vehicle types. These are total number of samples after cleaning, and we have RTO-wise. So when I say RTO-wise, PCMC, as in Pune Municipal Corporation and Pimpri-Chinchwad corporations are 2 neighboring cities, and there is vehicles flying between the cities, and the vehicles from both RTOs keep moving each other. So those were considered in our studies. Then comes heart of emission inventory, which is emission factor, which is a very important data set. So we actually relied on ARAI data set. You can see the data set that is available currently with Government of India, and the ones that are not available, we had to choose an alternate options to develop these emission factors. So this actually needs to be standardized because under NCAP, this is the standard operating procedure for developing a source apportionment study. And this being a major factor in emission inventory, using different data can actually result in coming out with different type of outputs, which will affect the uniformity in the study. So all the pollutants will be looking into PM, NO2, CO, HC, and also the climate change pollutant, which is CO2. When it comes to implementation and monitoring, this is the place where the technology plays a very vital role. When it comes to implementation, there are different modes of implementation. The first and foremost is very easy monitoring using manual monitoring by traffic personnel. The second one is sticker-based system, where vehicles will be recognized based on BS standards, and stickers of particular colors will be assigned to that. This is the example or learning taken from Paris, and we also have much more advanced AI-based technology, which is ANPR camera-based monitoring, which is automatic number plate radar mechanism. So this goes with the implementation. Now comes the impact, which is again a very critical aspect. So we will be looking into three major aspects. One is the reduced congestion, air quality improvement, and CO2 reduction. When it comes to reduced congestion, we have will be looking into Google Maps API or any other crowdsourcing information providers, where data set can be easily extracted, and we can sort of compare it before and after the implementation of LEZ. Next is the air quality improvement. We have state-run ambient air quality monitoring stations. We have also the low-cost sensors, making sure this is timely calibrated. We also look into marker pollutants such as black carbon, diesel particles, soot particle, organic carbons, so that influence from other sources can be eliminated and the influence from fossil fuel alone can be measured. And the last but not the least is the emission inventory study. The entire process needs to be redone just for that area to identify the overall improvement. Last is with respect to CO2 reduction, it's the same process. Thank you.
Thanks, Moorthy, for setting the stage for our third session on technology and data for low emission zones. Welcome. I would say I'll start with welcome to all for this third session. In fact, we had a very wonderful day today. Right from the morning, we had very good sessions, and starting with a keynote speech from Mr. Sudhendu Sinha, and then Mr. Amitabh Kant, Mr. Amit Bhatt, and both have set the context and highlighted the importance of technology and data for the low emission zones. In fact, I completely agree when Mr. Amitabh Kant has pointed out, he has named the cities like Milan, Barcelona, London, Paris, where state-of-art technologies like AI have been used for identifying the areas where LEZs can be brought in. That also raised one very important question, that to have a technology analyzed, we need to have the data available for the analysis part. So I would start this session with the first question on how can we have effective data availability with the right efficacy, real-time data, right? And this question I'll put up to Namita.
Hi everyone, I'm Namita. It's really excited to be here. Thank you for having me here. I think, one of the things that was discussed sort of earlier is that, unfortunately to start, mostly the country has depended on regulatory grade sensor network, which unfortunately is extremely expensive and it's really hard to scale. So today, for example, we have less than about 150 cities or towns where we actually have any monitoring out of like 4,000 cities and towns across the country. And this is primarily because these regulatory grade sensors are extremely expensive to set up and deploy. Just for context, we recently set up a network in UP and Bihar rural areas of 700 sensors. And the cost of that network for 3 years was equivalent to setting up 3 regulatory grade sensors in a particular city, right? So that's really sort of the cost difference. So, I truly believe that the sort of real way to be able to set up the kind of networks and the data that we need to be able to really understand the problem, which is, you cannot solve something you don't measure, right? Is to be able to, really sort of, depend on these low-cost sensors and a lot of, and I wouldn't even call them low-cost sensors. The sensor technology has become much more advanced in the past few years. The level of accuracy has improved significantly. A lot of research on calibration algorithms has happened, as a result of which these sensors are actually quite accurate. That is primarily the way that we can get to the kind of data we need to be able to actually solve these problems.
Absolutely, Namita, and you have hit the right point of the cost effectiveness of these sensors, because India is typically a market where everything has to be cost competitive for its mass acceptance.
So I just want to add like one more point to that. Cost is one factor, but the second is also the ease of deployment, ease of maintenance. Because these sensors can actually be deployed on top of buses, on cars, on rickshaws, at street lights, in government buildings, in home balconies, versus the regulatory grade sensors. They actually need like a huge sort of room and space to deploy, and significant cost and effort to be able to maintain them over a period of time. So, that ease of deployment, can really help us get the kind of data that we actually need to be able to understand the problem better.
Thanks, Namita. So, when we have the data now available, and it said that data is the new oil, right? So, all it matters then is how we analyze that data and what we can from the analysis, what we can find out, which can be readily implemented. So my next question goes to Siddharth. I mean, Google is the one which handles data quite a lot, so we need some insights that how the data can be analyzed in an effective way, and it can be readily usable for the Indian mass market.
No, absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. Firstly, I'm glad that we are talking about low emission zones in the first place, because cities occupy 3% of the landmass but contribute to 75% of the emissions globally. And we are sitting in a city rather, where an average Delhiite loses 11.9 years of their lives to air pollution. So I think it's a great time to talk about this. You've talked about data. I think it's important to understand, like, let me give you an example in terms of what Google is doing on this front. So as Namita rightly pointed out, today you can install air sensors across different locations. And what Google does is we work with our local partners, we work with AuraShore, we work with Respirer, and we basically deploy hyper-local air sensors across cities. So far, we've completed sensor deployment in about 75 cities. But the crux now is, and because you mentioned, Mr. Kant spoke about AI this morning, is what insights are you able to derive? Just putting thousands of sensors or hundreds of sensors is not the answer. The answer is what is the information that they're actually throwing up. Now, over there, it becomes important that you need to use powerful algorithms, including AI, ML, and so on, even neural networks to that matter, to understand how is it that your thousands of data points that you're getting, how do they, for example, like what we do is that we don't just look at the air quality information, we look at the wind direction, we look at the temperature, we look at the satellite imagery, and then we are able to predict where these pollution hotspots are, how these pollution hotspots are varying across the day, how do they vary across weeks, how do they vary across years, and then it allows us to make predictions or recommendations which can potentially become useful to policymakers. But at the same time, this part is about low emission zones specifically, but then we also do other things. For example, now that we are talking about this, and theoretically in a low emission zone, you would also want vehicles to have the lowest possible levels of emissions. One of the biggest problems in India is that today we see traffic and emissions, congestion and emissions as two separate things. And that is not true. It is the more congestion there is, the higher are your emissions. And so at the root of the problem is to also use this data to then solve for congestion. And we have a project which is called Project Greenlight. It's running in Hyderabad. It's running in a couple of other cities in India, where we basically use data from maps anonymized, and then we basically use it to understand where the choke points in the city are, how do they vary. And once we superimpose traffic signals on top of it, we are able to understand how do you actually change their timings so that your split failures are reduced, how does traffic move even faster, and how do you actually prevent congestion. So the point is that multiple data points exist, but the real one of the best things that has happened today is that with the advent of AI, you're actually able to take thousands of these data points and you're able to throw up meaningful insights. And just conclude by saying what was mentioned earlier is that today you don't just have these air quality sensors on static assets. You have them on mobile assets as well. Some of our sensors, they're on public transport buses. They're on auto rickshaws, they're on telecom towers. So basically, when you get thousands of data points and then you combine these thousands of data points with other things that matter, especially things like weather, because I mean, I live in East Delhi, which is Anand Vihar, and you'll always notice pollution levels spike in the evening. Why? Because there's an ISBT there, and the maximum number of buses that they have coming is in the evening. Evening is also when the temperature is lower, especially in the winters. So all that pollution settles down. The point is, how do we combine all of this to throw insights? Thanks.
Thanks, Siddharth. It's very true that India is a typical market, unlike other regions, and one city is different than the other. Tapping a lot of environmental data like wind, this is really true, really required for the cities, and also the congestion data, and all this would be really helpful. Another point that Google especially can bring in for markets like India is their global experience. As it was pointed out in the morning, many cities have done well for bringing low emission zones, and they have worked out really well for them, and they have implemented and enforced it properly. Google is global. We have all across the world. So if insights can be brought into India from the other regions and the technologies, that would be really, it would be helpful for India.
Yeah, just to add one thing, actually, I'm actually proud the project that I mentioned over here, it's called Project AirView 100. So like you said, when we talk about Google, it's about getting insights from other countries into India, but I'm happy to tell you that AirView 100 is actually an India first project. This project started in India, it was designed for India. And so we are very happy that, today India first solutions are designed, as like you rightly said. And, this is something my former boss used to tell me. He was here giving the keynote address this morning. He said that India is the tech garage of the world. It has some of the most unique challenges, and if you can solve for them, you can actually solve for the world. So maybe now's the time to start looking in the sort of reverse direction, where we see that how did we crack this in India and how do we crack this in the rest of the world?
Absolutely, and I'm very optimistic that India is going to be AI hub also in future. So it will be really helpful. So my next question goes to Subrata Mitra from Ather. And Ather is the pioneer in bringing in two-wheeler electrics. And when we talk about low emission zones, we cannot skip the thought about the electric vehicles. So, Subrata, we want your thoughts that how two-wheeler electric can be instrumental in bringing about the low emission zones, and how a technology can be enabled in these vehicles. See, we know about telematics, and it has been used in light duty vehicles quite affordably. But when it comes to two-wheelers, again, the cost competitiveness is the major driving factor. So can you share your thoughts that how telematics can be effectively used, or if there is other technology that is available in the two-wheeler electrics that can be effectively used for bringing in for the low emission zones?
Thank you for the opportunity. As far as two-wheeler electric is concerned, I'll speak Ather's perspective. We have almost around 200,000 plus vehicles on the Indian roads. And every day in the morning when the riders start, because all the vehicles are connected, we exactly know how much of CO2 we have started saving. So believe me, by the time people reach office, our team which monitors this real-time network, by the time they have their breakfast, they know that so much kilos or tons of CO2 has been saved for that day. Just to give you a context, FAME 2 scheme and all the EVs that are on the road, which Mr. Sinha referred to today morning, around 36 odd lakhs, has almost saved around 6.6 million tons of CO2 emissions in the country so far. And these are data points that published by the government, not that of the industry. So these are conservative numbers. Now, what we are seeing is that if there is a right policy framework like FAME, if it is in place, if it is consistent and if it gets delivered on ground, transition can happen, and it can significantly happen. There were today morning discussion was also on consumer adopting it and why. There is a segment of consumers who have this, I want to go green. but a large chunk of Indian consumers actually look at the total cost of ownership, price viability, service related issues, what is the lifetime value of the vehicle at point of scrappage and all. And they are today coming on to the belief that yes, EV is doable. And that's the reason you are seeing this transition take place. We are today almost at 5 to 6% penetration level. Now here is a very interesting point. While two-wheeler is at 5 to 6%, four-wheeler is 2-3% odd. Three-wheelers in some cities, I will not call states, are at 50% plus. Now, if many of you are curious why that happens is, to ride a three-wheeler, you need a permit from the local authorities. So sometimes the local authorities, they don't give permits for three-wheelers, either because there are excess of three-wheelers for that reason. So the electric three-wheelers come in because they don't need a permit. So if you see, sometimes when this intervention at a regulatory level has a positive impact. And we have seen that data points enough to show that where, because three-wheelers, if you see electric three-wheeler and a CNG three-wheeler, almost price parity, total cost of ownership is almost similar. Maybe electric is slightly almost there, we are close. You will find that CNG is doing well. But wherever CNG, they don't get permission on time, or because there is excess of three-wheelers, so the authorities don't give, and suddenly you will find a lot of EV three-wheelers there. So regulatory intervention actually makes the difference, it's proven point. As far as connectivity is concerned, I think in our case, and more so with the case of others, most of the new generation EVs, these are all connected vehicles, so one exactly know what is the behavior, usage pattern, what are the, on which are the routes they are getting used. And in our case, for example, the Google map is right on the dashboard, so we can exactly tell the consumer or the rider that, avoid this congestion and that. So there's enough data points for us to today take, whether it is at an individual granular street level where you want to do, where is the, emission majorly happening. I think even if you take large cities, like even if you see EV penetration, Hyderabad, Bangalore, one of the largest city, and the huge congestion there, Delhi. And I think a positive framework from a policy perspective can create this momentum. And we have seen FAME deliver. Now it's essential that this momentum continues at least for the next 2-3 years, for the industry also to scale up, make it more price affordable. That's one. The second aspect, I think, is from the specifically for the two-wheeler perspective, you have huge amount of two-wheelers on the road which are beyond their life. I'm talking about ICE two-wheelers. Some of them are 10, 15 or 20 years, much old. While you have been able, like in Delhi, you have been able to replace, say, 10-year-old diesel cars, 15-year-old, petrol cars. You don't see them on Delhi road. But have you ever seen a cop stop a two-wheeler to check how old the two-wheeler is? Because it's a sensitive issue. It's for the mass market commuter vehicles. But we need to come up with a proposition for that segment of users, that if they can replace their vehicles with some kind of incentive. Most of them are also, your skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled labor, it could be a carpenter, it could be a plumber and all, if you can give them some benefits through the Mudra scheme. So there is enough intervention that government can do actually to transition. And as far as total cost of ownership, unlike a four-wheeler, where the delta is very high, that, even after 5 years, consumers say that, maybe using a ICE vehicle was cost effective. In the case of two-wheeler, now it's almost a 2 year you recover whatever delta you're paying. So there is enough data points there.
Absolutely, Subrata. You're right. We have a lot of two-wheelers, IC engine based, which are very old, and those are the ones which pollutes quite a lot, and still they run on road. So those are the first which we should be curbing. Second is India rides on two-wheelers. The sheer volume of two-wheelers that's being sold in India, it's enormous. And when we look at the other vehicle segments, it's very right that we should be targeting two-wheelers first. And electrification of two-wheelers is the thing, that can be readily done. As you said, the upfront cost is, it's very comparable to the ICE versions. Even the TCO works quite a lot. And all it needs is the regulatory framework the government should push in the initiatives, incentives, for the consumers to have more of electric two-wheelers on road. And low emission zones, it can definitely help a lot, because a lot of unskilled and most of the people, they use two-wheelers, so that would work a lot. This puts me to the next question, because two-wheelers is fine, but then two-wheelers are not allowed to go on highways, right? And for highways, if you talk about electric, only light-duty vehicles is the present thing, and probably in future heavy-duty vehicles. So my next question is to Mr. Abhijeet, that for having electrification possible in India, so what infrastructural work would be required for the highways?
Thank you. I first would like to congratulate ICCT from bringing this discussion on low emission zone. If I rightly remember 2021, I termed it differently in green campuses, that we should, instead of going to mass deployment of vehicle where we are comparing our electric vehicle and our diesel vehicle, we should first think about zones, campuses, cantonments, airports, shipyards, whichever campus we can convert green. It was not taken very well by the industry then, both fossil fuel and electric, because it was not about comparing an EV with your diesel car. It was more about creating an infrastructure which gives you a more sense of also infrastructure, sensors, and also a certain set of data, which is compelling, and it is also motivating our users who is living in that pocket to switch to its personal mobility. But rather we jumped into the mass retailing of deployment. So I think ICCT deserves a very strong compliment and congratulation for bringing this conversation from there to here, where we are discussing that how we can take this forward on within city and on highways. Also now, since over a period of last 10 years, we have grown from an economy where unique things and unique initiatives were very rare. An initiative like SEZ has proven to be very good of bringing industrial revolution and industrialization, which is in an organized manner. So having a low emission LEZ, or you can say SEJ and LEZ, we can very well placed to serve. But the key is between switching over from a fossil alternative to a non-fossil fuel or zero emission or less emission alternative. If the decision is institutional, your society, your RWA, your apartment, your institute, your college, your city or your cantonment or airport has to take, then that decision is institutional. It is much more convincing to take on the basis of regulations, on the basis of policies, on the basis of instruments, procurement model or financing model. But when we jump to one more stage and we ask people to take decision, then they're more likely to go for something which they are not owning. Like going on an intercity bus, which is electric, is much likely for you to be adopting rather than buying a vehicle to go intercity or that to electric. So the switch between these two, and I'll also quote one of the very important work which need to be done at this stage of time, is that every trail of transit and every trail of mobility need to be very intensively audited right now. If we actually want to reach to net zero target of mobility and clean surface transport, and tech, what type of sensor and what type of techno-commercial alternative can be given to businesses is much more important to create right content for this decarbonization target. And once this matchmaking, why I'm saying matchmaking is because we'll have to not only audit what we are mobilizing, majority of food, majority of parcels which is reaching to you is an under very convincing weight which can be delivered through drone. So how, where, it may sound little weird to you right now at this stage, this year, but going ahead, how drones will be able to take a lot of emissions, how buses will be able to, so I'm not getting into examples, I'm saying each and every sector, each and every transit and mobility. And at the other side, made for each other matchmaking is needed, that each and every business need to understand what is their low carbon, low emission, clean alternative. If these indexing are done, the purpose of this session, the purpose of creating a complete transition outlay of how businesses will switch from one place to another place, one fuel to another fuel, will be able to do. And if I conclude, you may believe that it is a bit complicated what I'm saying to deliver and to create on cross sectors, 20, 30 sectors we have in our economy, that by 2070, if we have to complete our net zero decarbonization, then on the economic side, we will be needing somewhere around $10 trillion. And $10 trillion is not something which you can, bring into 5-year or 10-year. If I disseminate the same target into two more, I'm not only saying $10 trillion from transport. I'm saying it also include industrial, it also include household, it also include construction and various sectors like leather, textile and everything. This totals up to an extent of around 2026 and 2030 to be 253 billion to 263 billion annual investment. If I include 5 more years, 2031 to 35, that investment into the green sector for doing this transition expected to reach between 325 to 355 billion US dollar. And when I will not go ahead of 2035 is because today we are sitting at around 45 billion actual investment that we attract out of 170 billion US dollar required to reach that target of 10 trillion. Now, in this current scenario, if there is a solution to bring enough capital to do that matchmaking of data which I said, it is much more required to understand that 1% of the global clean economy, or you can say circular economy, which is 4.5 trillion, 1% is around 45 billion, is by 2030 expected to be built. Are we in position to create, at least through highways, through cities, to make an accumulative target of around 2025 to 2030 of from 1% to 5%? That accumulative target will give us around 45 billion, and if I calculate it to the 5-fold, 1% to 5%, it will be 225 billion, and what I said is needed by 2035 is 253 billion in 26 to 2030. So if it is difficult for you to believe that this kind of regulations, this kind of clean and very detailed intensive auditing of each and every trail of transition mobility in each sector can be placed on plate for each and every business to translate and to convert or to diverse or what we call transit to a cleaner position is difficult, then you will be surprised by the regulation to be bulldozed into fleet or bus or delivery or ships or railways or aviation, because all of them would have coming regulation. Now coming in a short while to your question is, how do we do it into highways? What we managed to do is what we call e-highway today on National Highway EV prototype pilot program of ease of doing business is less than 0% of the conversion from what buses we have fleets we are currently having on diesel and other fossil fuel. 20 buses and 200 cars. They are less than 1%. And if you accumulatively engage all vehicle which are currently running out of city, means intercity, they are also less than 1% in India. So the data which we need, the kind of alternative options that we need is we are far much behind of what type of information needed. And to have this information, it is very, very important to have technology, to have product, to have sensors, and to have a good, convincing alternative business model for businesses to switch over from fossil to other. Going ahead, I will be able to contribute much more to it, but go ahead with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Abhijeet. In fact, you have pointed out a couple of things like it's not only low emission zones, it is also special economic zones. Because whenever we look at media, whenever we talk about this topic in any forums, it always comes, within the cities, we can designate certain areas as low emission zones. And then there are a lot of hiccups because it requires a lot of regulatory framework, and then it gets stuck, and then we don't move forward. Whereas, as you said, special economic zones like airports, we have ports where very specialized kind of vehicles are only running. Those can be easily electrified. We can have regulatory frameworks also made for those areas, and those can become as a benchmark and as the talking point. We can showcase those special economic zones, and then we can move ahead for the low economic zones, low emission zones, sorry. So taking this for,
This notion, I think, of changing between one economy zone or one emission zone to another emission zone is somewhere lies between the deployment cost of that particular zone. How much vehicle charger, what type of buses or what type of electrification would be required to convert that particular zone or particular highway is something very, very much important to drive a financing activity across it. And when it comes to driving and financing activity, whether it's into circular into position or linear into position, it is depending on data of utilization, depending on data of break even, depending on data of what is being invested and what is being brought out. And if it is proven to be good for a shipyard, it is proven to be good for an airport, or if it is proven to be good for a highway, it is creating a pathway for all those vehicles who are still there in that zone or on that track, who are not, green, to convert into it. And it also gives us a sense of infrastructure associated to it, because many of you would have a certain type of debate that, okay, on highways, if we are going with electric, what will happen when hydrogen will come tomorrow? So infrastructure and the ecosystem of data and the alternative decarbonization is not dependent on one tech. It is always agnostic to the tech. It is always holding the decarbonization and low emission conversion agenda ahead. And when you are holding the agenda, you are holding the economy. And economy gives you enough mobilization. If you talk about National Highway EV, we were very clear from the beginning that we are not going to put this certain upgradation cost on the shoulders of government. We will be able to do it on PPP mode, and I'm glad that recently when we opened it with power and petroleum PSUs to hold in a PPP mode 30% of a station at India Energy Week, it was very well taken by them, is because they have seen the wrong deployment age, where one second generation of petrol pump, I can say, where one station was having one charger. It did not work that way, the way it should be. So the right attitude which ICCT is taking now is to create that zone economically, technically, techno-commercial, policy-wise and procurement-wise, also finance-wise, viable for somebody else to copy-paste on some other patch or some other zone. If you are going to do it into linear equation, you will again end up by putting up single charger, then subsidized charger, and what you will get at the end of 10 years is like 3% utilization of charger in the public space and 45-year long break even of a charger, which is purchased from government pocket. It is not going to create a decarbonization sense where blended financing and private capital will be able to come and invest. You need to make it profitable by the data, by the technology, by the sense of deployment, and also by the business sense. So that's my takeaway from that, and we did not needed government finance to come other than 30% stations going to power and petroleum PSUs.
Correct, absolutely, Abhijeet. And you have pointed out the importance of data. Now there is availability of lots and lots of data, and it all, the silver bullet is how we use that data effectively, how we tap the low-hanging fruits. So the next question, in fact, I put up to both Namita and Siddharth. And the question is, we have so much of data available. We know the technologies that can be used. Now the point is how to execute, which technology is suitable for India, which technology is, very readily accepted in India. It has to be cost effective, as we discussed earlier. In the morning, Amitabh Kant has also mentioned about, automatic vehicle number plate recognition using AI and a couple of more technologies. So what is the best and suitable thing that can happen in India related to how this data can be analyzed first, and second, what is the right technology for the Indian market? I think, Namita, you can go ahead first.
All right, sure. Thank you for that. As we discussed that, we can have a large amount of data, but if we're actually not using that data to understand the problem, to solve the problem, then, it's just data, right? We have to convert that data into insights and knowledge and eventually solutions. So like when we work with data, there are sort of various aspects of, how this data needs to be used, and then also, what kind of, and how to ensure that we're getting the right types of data. So when we talk about the technology, one thing that's really important is one, we are building and using technology that can actually be used and deployed in India. India has a lot of unique challenges, and just deploying sensor networks is not enough, right? We have to make sure that the sensor networks are maintained well. We have to make sure they're continuously sending data. We need to make sure that the sensors are properly calibrated and they're actually sending accurate data that can actually be leveraged for insights, right? This is why I think, working, the work that the Indian startups and the Indian research teams are doing is extremely important, because, we need local forces who understand the technology, who can, properly maintain the technology and properly ensure that this technology is working under Indian conditions and has been sort of tested and tried. Which is, one of the sort of biggest challenges that I have seen, in my work in this space in the last sort of 8 years, is that a lot of these networks get deployed, but how do you ensure they run continuously and continuously to give valuable data? Now, once, this data comes, right, now the question is how do we actually sort of leverage it? And, Siddharth spoke to a sort of lot of ways that Google is working on using the data, like, determining hotspots to figure out, which are the areas which have greater concerns, so that maybe more regulatory grade sensors can be set up there, more specific action can be taken there. There are also a lot of source apportionment studies that are happening now in different states, and this is where, a lot of these sensor networks are now expanding beyond particulate matter into gases like SO2, NO2, ozone, CO, and, to Siddharth's point, like, also starting to measure wind speed, wind direction, right? Because there is, a much better understanding now that, it's not just about the sort of air quality at a particular location. We also need to understand, from the data, what are the sort of key sources that are contributing to this, so that we can actually sort of, focus on solving for those sources. And then to be able to evaluate that when you actually sort of reduce those sources, then what happens? Another sort of concept that people are realizing more and more is this concept of air sheds, right? That, air quality is, air quality in Delhi is not because of just local sources in Delhi, right? There's a whole air shed and, a sort of air, pollution from sources across the northern belt can sort of come and land here. So understanding the sort of air shed, which is basically, a region which has similar air quality attributes which are being contributed, to by similar local sources can really help us identify, real sort of, sources and understand the problem and be able to work towards solutions. Because, air pollution is not something that, Delhi government can work on air pollution and fix the problem in Delhi, right? It has to be a united effort by various states, across the country. And for that, we need to be able to understand, how, what are the different factors that are affecting this. So, so I think, a lot of sort of, stuff is going on both in terms of the technology that needs to be developed as well as, how it has to be used. Because the eventual goal is to really sort of drive greater understanding of the problem and real solutions. I constantly get asked, so you've been working in air quality for 8 years, has it actually improved? And it's a tough one because, solving air pollution is not, like, flipping of a switch, right? Or setting up purifiers at highways. It's real work of, understanding the different sources and sort of working on each source in a very sort of focused way and ensuring that, we can reduce the sort of amount of emissions coming out of that sources over a period of time.
Thanks, Namita. And Siddharth, before you take it up, I just want to add a follow-up question. Namita has spoken about the data, a lot of data, and the privacy. So if you, in media we have came across a lot of situations where the data privacy has created an uproar. So you can also shed light on how the data privacy can be, managed when so much of data is available.
Data privacy in terms of air quality data?
Yeah, when we have a lot of data, generated and collected in India, so that how that privacy equation, problem can be solved.
Honestly, I truly believe that air quality data should have no privacy at all. It should be publicly available to everyone. The government, if it's investing in creating this data, it should be publicly awareness to, be available to all citizens so that they can use it to take better care of their health. So I actually don't believe any privacy is necessary for, environmental and air quality data.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, that point is very valid. So yeah, Siddharth.
No, just to add to this, the question of personal data would come in if somebody were to be giving you personalized recommendation. But a sensor operating, let's say in a Delhi Transport Corporation bus, giving you insights, that is actually non-personalized data, to begin with. But I'm glad you mentioned the air-shared approach. So I think it's important to understand, one of the really important things is, when I was with NITI Aayog back in 2019, we were working on the NCAP, which is the National Clean Air Program. And if you look at NCAP, you would clearly see there, it says that air pollution requires an air-shared approach, which means that just by creating low-emission zones, it is not the case that the pollution would stop creeping into a low-emission zone, right? So the whole point here is that all that we've been discussing throughout this panel has been that what is it that we do with different data sources? The answer to that is that how do you ensure that the data that you're getting is converted into meaningful insights? Like I gave you the example of me living in East Delhi and the fact that pollution levels spike up massively during the night because there is an ISBT and a maximum number of UP-SRT buses come here. Delhi has electric buses, Delhi has CNG buses. Is it solving the problem of air pollution in East Delhi? The answer is no, right? But the answer to that question is that policymakers will be able to make that change if I am able to take data to them saying that, oh, by the way, from September till January, air pollution in East Delhi was very high, and it was higher during the night time than it was during the daytime. And if we were to optimize the bus schedule such that a vast majority of the interstate buses, which are actually BS4 diesel guzzling buses, were to be changed during daytime, right, a lot of that pollution is going to reduce. So the point is that we have to make sense out of that data. That is point number one. Point number two is that within these low emission zones, how do you sort of synchronize the different insights and data sources that you're getting? I mentioned two of Google's initiatives. For instance, I talked about how we are doing hyper-local air quality, like sensors. And so basically Google allows you in some cities where we've already deployed these sensors to actually see street level air quality. How's the air quality data varying across the street? How does it vary across the time of day? How does it vary across seasons? In parallel, we have projects like Greenlight, where we are optimizing traffic signals. How do you, and I'm not even putting on my Google hat here, I'm just thinking beyond as a layman, how do you actually merge the two of these, right? Now, and the third most important thing is that while we are talking about technology and while we are talking about data, AI, of course, is very important. Both Project Greenlight and AirView 100, which we deliver, run on AI. But, you know, there are things that India can still crack, which are not even AI and which are so primitive and so easy for us to crack, right? So you create a low emission zone, you say कि यहाँ पे, you know, diesel vehicles आएंगी नहीं, यहाँ पे केवल EVs आएंगी. My question is, what is the alternative that you are offering to the people inside? How many of us know that on all navigation tools that you can use today in India, only 5 to 6 cities will you be able to see the real-time arrival of metro rails and buses? केवल 5 से 6 cities में. बाकी आपको जो timings दिखती हैं, they're all based on static schedules which have been published. And the answer to this is very simple. You have the problem is that STUs, they do not use standard data format, which is basically GTFS, General Transit Feed Specifications. The day you are able to crack this, you'll be able to see when your next bus is arriving, when your next metro is arriving in real time. And the reason why I mentioned this is, think about this. Today, if you want to go from point A to B, you say कि आपको यहाँ से एक destination X पे जाना है, and then you're like, okay, I have to take a bus, then I have to take the metro, then I have to take something else, but I don't know when they'll come. What will you do? If you have a choice, you'll just take your personal vehicle instead. So my point is that when we create these low emission zones, let's not just deploy, you know, the insights that we get from our air quality sensors. Let us not only, you know, optimize for traffic, but let us also make available some of the most common and basic interventions that we can. Because India, you need to understand that we are still a developing country, and one of the most fundamental things about developing countries is that people have a much higher cognitive burden, which means that the more number of decisions that you impose on them, they are going to take the shortest path towards the end of that decision. And if you, and data is one of the things that you can use to crack that, something as simple as real-time arrival of buses and real-time arrival of metro rails. And this is critical because India transport sector contributes to anywhere between 14 to 16% of the emissions, right? 90% of them come from the road transport sector. 80% of people and freight moves by road today. If you can crack this, you're done.
So I just want to add a couple more points to your question, you know, regarding like how do you make sure that technology that we use actually sort of, you know, works in India. Now India, you know, is a very sort of unique country with its sort of unique challenges. You know, so like when we sort of develop, you know, our networks across India, there are like various things we need to, you know, be able to think about. Like for example, you know, large parts of the country still do not have continuous electricity supply. So, you know, solar-based solutions, you know, are something which, you know, work really well, even in rural areas, and, you know, can ensure that we are getting sort of continuous data. You know, internet connectivity is something which we have seen to be sparse. There are a lot of areas, you know, of course it's much better now. You do have access to, you know, 2G and 4G, you know, in most parts of the country, but there are, you know, various areas where the internet connectivity is really sparse. So setting up your deployments to ensure that there's proper internet connectivity in those areas, as well as building solutions, you know, which are storing data locally, so that, you know, if there is sparse internet connectivity, you're not losing data, becomes sort of essential. Local, you know, maintenance is really important. Safety is really important. You know, this is a very unique Indian problem. You set up a device and next day it's stolen, right? Like if it has, you know, a charging cable will get stolen, right? So, you know, being able to set up these devices in ways, you know, which are safe, which are not prone to vandalism, is something that, you know, we really have to sort of think about. Can we deploy this in government buildings? Can we deploy them where, you know, there's a guard? Can we deploy them at a height? Can we deploy them in a way that, you know, nothing is easy to sort of pull out? So, you know, so safety against vandalism is something that we really have to think about when we deploy our sensors. Of course, they need to be easy to deploy because, you know, we have a lot of unskilled labor. And if we can actually leverage them to manage deployment and maintenance, you know, and make troubleshooting and on-the-ground maintenance really easy, that really helps because, you know, getting trained people to actually manage the networks is extremely hard. And of course, you know, cost, you know, plays a huge role in a country like India. So trying to sort of, you know, do the most with as little cost as possible. But I think some of these are, you know, lessons we have learned in the networks that, you know, we have deployed.
You're right, Namita. Upskilling is also a very important topic, and whenever any new technology comes, upskilling of labor work is also very important. All right, so before we move for the question and answer from the audience, I would like to have a concluding remark from each of the panelists, starting from Subrata.
Thanks. I think it was a very interesting discussion. See, from the electric two-wheeler industry, the way we see it is that the scooter transition is possible, 100% possible. There are enough models out there in the market. Almost every large OEM and startups have today models. The motorcycle segment is something that will take some time to crack, primarily because the motorcycle riders, they ride a long distance and they typically need a larger battery pack. And the moment EVs is that you have a larger battery pack, the more expensive the vehicle is. But still, this year we are expecting around 17 million two-wheelers to will be sold by 31st of March 24, 17 plus million. Less than a million is electric. So almost 16 million plus ICE vehicles have got added just this year. And it's fair to expect that they will be on the road for at least for the next 10 to 20 years. So we have to think of ways and means of how to get this transition done. I normally hear from the governments, that there is a fiscal challenge and all. I think there are enough mechanisms that government can intervene. For example, you can look at an additional, surcharge, say, on a particular kind of fuel to charge this transition. You can have an additional registration charge for the vehicle so that EV registration is subsidized, because even state to state the policy is not clear. So sometimes the incentive is there and again it suddenly gets withdrawn, it comes back. Then you have issues like, one person can take only one subsidy in his lifetime. And this is a very peculiar scenario where the head of the family buys the first EV and the second EV in the family is forced, they cannot buy the second EV, they go back to ICE because the head of the family cannot take it. Another member of the family can buy the vehicle but will not get the loan from the bank because they don't have a CIBIL rating. So due to our own policy mechanism, we force the consumer to go back to that. I think financially I don't see a challenge. There is enough mechanism in the government to address. One area where I think we need to focus is to agree to a statement that charging infrastructure, the entire focus of the industry and the government had been on four-wheeler and large format vehicles. Somehow we missed out this entire two-wheeler charging. Or the assumption was that, I always say, it's a curse that decision makers, including people like us, we drive a four-wheeler, we never thought how the two-wheeler guy will charge. Assumption was, wo to kahin kar lega, but where will he do? Now, for example, most of the two-wheeler riders can't do it, and that's where I think the next intervention has to be, and it can be done monetarily, including create micro-level entrepreneurs to, something like a PCO model where a person can actually set up a shop to charge 5 or 6 vehicles in one go.
So important point is that we should have some charging infrastructure for the low emission zones so that it becomes very easy for the electric two-wheelers.
Yes, because if you want to give the commuter the comfort that, today it is not just range anxiety, I think is addressed. It is a charging anxiety. Where do I come back to charge? If you have enough number of chargers in the city where the person can go and charge at an affordable price, again government can intervene, you give that comfort, now not a concern, and that can do, and you can create micro-level entrepreneurs. We are talking about something like 1 to 2 million chargers, fast chargers for two-wheelers alone. Convert that back with 5 chargers per person. You're talking about creating at least 200,000 plus entrepreneurs in the country at a micro level who can do this. Of course, it will need the capex to be brought in by the government, but then you can have a 10-year kind of an opex which the person then creates an income.
So, Siddharth, quickly.
No, nothing. I just say 3 things. One is that I think it's really important that we don't just come up with data, but we use that data to give meaningful insights. And when I say meaningful insights, I'm talking about specific action items, right? We are not saying, okay, yeah, sure, this X can be done. I mean, when I used to be in the government, I once read a 400-page report on grid reliability for charging infrastructure, which had all sorts of data analysis about how grid reliability is going to be affected. And it ended by saying, therefore, it's very challenging, and therefore, we need to improve grid reliability. The point is, we have to give very specific targeted interventions. That's one. Second is, using this data, of course. Second is, that we need to have pilots. Let us not think of everything at a macro level. Before going macro, before talking about the policy ecosystem, let us go for the lowest hanging fruit, which is to work with a friendly city and to do this on a pilot basis. Because trust me, when you go to the government, after having done a pilot, with the results in hand, it becomes much more appealing to them rather than asking them to get a national framework. And the final third point is that create public awareness. Create public awareness about not just the fact that PM 2.5 and PM 10 is important, but also that SOX, NOx are equally important. So your low emission zones, they should not just be about PM 2.5 and PM 10. There are pollutants which are far more harmful, and Amit and I keep chatting about this, that this is something that we need to crack. So those three things: give meaningful insights, do pilots, use pilots as a way to, sort of scale this up, and make the invisible visible, because that's essentially what it is.
So Namita, it will be fire round for you, just 1 minute.
Sure. I think there's just like a couple of points here. One, I think along with these low emission zones, I think there's a huge role for industry to play in getting to zero emissions. For example, I'm really proud, I'm on the board of Zomato, and I'm really proud about their goal to get to 100% zero emission deliveries by 2033. And I think that's the kind of goals we need from more members of the industry to really get us to where we need to go. That said, I do believe that these low emission zones can be a great sort of stepping stone to getting to the, to hit the larger goal. There are lots of issues with, the amount of sort of the rate at which the air mixes, can be really achieve, better air quality in those low emission zones is something that will need to be measured, and I think that's where technology will play, a strong role. But I think you get a lot of additional benefits from having these low emission zones, right, regarding sort of awareness, right? People who are working in that low emission zones, the level of awareness that you get, about, emissions is huge. Second, is also that, if we can scale the low emission zones and have like hundreds of these low emission zones across the cities, then, it starts becoming a really powerful tool to slowly build out the infrastructure to get to the larger picture. But, very happy to see, so much progress going in this space and, hoping to sort of contribute in whatever way we can.
Abhijeet.
I think next 2 years are going to be very, very crucial and very, very critical. I'm not saying this from the perspective of that 2026, we will get to know that we have missed the first bus of decarbonization or we got it. Because currently, if you look at the opportunity also, forget about what investment we are attracting in this for the deployment and the upholding financially such large level transition of energy is around 170 billion opportunity, 45 billion US dollar we attract. In 2026, if we have to create an opportunity, at least forget about financing and blended financing, it should be around 253 billion US dollar. And to create opportunity for 253 billion US dollar, what Siddharth just said, that data or an idea are two different things. An idea backed by data does not require much push. But if we have to enter into negotiation of whether this can be taken under climate financing or not, whether this should be funded, financed, subsidized, policy should be brought down, or regulation should be brought down, some sort of subsidy should be given, that's a second conversation comes in. First is to create a cross-sector audit of transition, not only in transit, in road transport and highway, but also into aviation, into bio, and also chemical, leather, textile. You can go across 20 sectors. And I don't know how many organizations like ICCT are there in India who can do such audits and who can create such opportunities backed by a data. And even ICCT would have to go for state. They will have to have much more, foot on state government and how their bus system, how their transit systems are operating to create at least a transition path for, transport sector on this way. So 2 years are very, very important. If we create that right kind of content, then that intent can be challenged to an extent how much government will be, or all stakeholder, be it bank, be it NBFCs, be it a green sovereign fund, or be it a private capital, will be able to come and back this idea of transition. Because what I believe is, if our PM has said that nobody can stop India from becoming third largest economy by 2030, then he's also necessarily quoting $35 trillion economy by 2047. That's the end of the Amrit Kal. India becomes 100. So in this 35 trillion, 10 trillion of decarbonization is also included. And we will have to work together, not compete with each other, but collaborate with each other to create that content so that transition can go smooth and opportunity can go next level for financial discussion.
Okay. All right. So, we are falling short of time. We could have some question and answers, but then audience can share it to ICCT team and we can take it offline. So with this, we will close this session and move for a group photograph.